Hello guys, in this video I want to talk about the Talkative tree problem and why his new interview reveals deeper community issues. Before we dive in, I want to make something clear. This interview exposes fractures in our Path of Exile community that needs addressing before Path of Exile 2 ecosystem becomes more toxic than it already is. This isn't about hating on Tree as a person, it's about examining why his approach to interviewing is problematic, what it reveals about GGG communication strategy, and how we can fix it, potentially. The recent interview has triggered significant community backlash, and for good reason. Let's break down what went wrong and, more importantly, how to fix it. I think the core problem with Talkative tree is lack of preparation and lack of game knowledge. The fundamental issue with interview is tree asked questions about systems that have already been fixed or changed one way or another, revealing a concerning lack of preparation. When you are given privilege of interviewing the game director, you have responsibility to the community to be informed. For example, asking about sprint functionality when this already been addressed, questioning armor mechanics that were previously adjusted, or claiming people don't use weapon swap when it's one of most utilized systems in the game. Even Jonathan had to correct him multiple of times during the interview. This isn't just embarrassing, it's just waste of everyone's time. When you have limited access to developers, every question should actually count. The second issue I have with Talkative tree and his approach is the proud noob problem and community division that it actually created. Tree cultivated his identity of being a proud noob who wants to stay in the space forever. Here's why that's problematic. We were all noobs at one point, but the goal is to grow, to learn, to understand the game depth. By positioning himself as permanent beginner while simultaneously being GGG's interviewer, community interviewer, he's creating an artificial divide. This noob elitist position creates tribalism, his audience being to see Path of Exile one veteran as elitist or some kind of gatekeepers, when in reality experienced players want Path of Exile 2 to succeed in its own right. We are stuck with this franchise for years because we love it. Our criticism isn't a hate, it's investment in the game's future. You cannot represent entire community when you actively avoid deepening your understanding of the system you're discussing. That's not being relatable, that's being unprepared. Another issue that I want to bring in is like softball questions and yes-manning. That's why he's stuck with the glazing tree nickname. Through the interview, Tree repeatedly failed to push back or dig deeper on critical topics when Jonathan gave an answer. Instead of following up with meaningful questions or challenging assumptions, Tree would just agree and move on. The problem with this approach, when you don't understand the game deeply enough, you cannot identify when an answer needs more scrutiny. You cannot follow up questions because you don't know what the implications are. This turns the interview into a corporate presentation rather than meaningful conversation. Compare this to Zizron interview approach when he asked a tough question, challenged design decision and pushed for the clarity even when it got kind of uncomfortable. From the other side, that's what actually community needs, not someone dancing around topics to feel safe. But I don't mean also to create artificial conflicts and farm drama or provoke the GGG side. Just have a proper balance when questioning about the issues that everybody wants to ask about. One of the most egregious moments was asking for more porters for maximum juice content, essentially requesting maximum reward for minimum effort and investment. This question reveals the fundamental misunderstanding of Path of Exile core design philosophy. 3. Did you consider like alternative solution? Did you think to ask about the map real currency? Maybe you could ask if there's in the future, if there is possibility to see that we can have currency that is strictly to, gauge the difficulty of the maps. So like in Path of Exile 1, you can use chaos to reroll maps. This question reveals fundamental misunderstanding of the Path of Exile core design philosophy that he didn't even consider. He didn't even consider deeply the question he asked himself. You could consider whatever players should learn to pick appropriate difficulty levels for themselves and then just have game cater to their poor decision making. This is what happens when your interviewer doesn't understand game systems deeply enough to frame questions. Whatever the game technically allows something is different from whatever it should be implemented. And this nuisance matter. If you stack like many small elements, it suddenly become like big issue that later on you need to solve. I also didn't like the China question, asking how the Path of Exile 2 performs in China. I mean, it's interesting trivia, but it's largely irrelevant to the Western audience concerns. The Chinese version operates like under a different monetization system. They need to rebuy like premium star stubs. They use Faustus as currency storage. It's kind of, I don't want to say that it's essentially a different game, but it's a whole different vibe. So this is a valuable interview time being spent on topics that doesn't really matter that much, instead of addressing community concerns that are more pressing, especially like before league start. The next question was about the rarity. When you talk about the rarity, you didn't really have a scope of the stat, and you could help showcase that to Jonathan. For those who know, rarity should be an endgame stat, something that players who have already min-maxed their builds can use to optimize further. It's kind of reward for the investment and knowledge. Tree touched on this but couldn't dig deeper because he doesn't play the game on that level. He couldn't explain why this matters or what implications are when it's gone or it's in the game. He just agreed and move on. This is precisely why the game knowledge is essential for the good interviewing. I heard that Zizran actually asked for the interview and got rejected, which it's kind of elephant in the room. Why Zizran apparently declined for his interview slot? Why Zizran is the one of the most primary face, I would say, of the Path of Exile content creators with decades of experience at this point. He understands games very good on many levels, and the fact that GGG choose 3 over more experienced content creators signals something concerning about their communication strategy. Like, are they looking for softballs rather than meaningful dialogue? Do they want someone who won't challenge the decision? It's rather concerning and actively contributes to community division and frustration, because a lot of voices are not heard from different corners of our community. Also, the whole interview have like a different, I would say, tone problem. We need to remember, obviously, the Path of Exile is supposed to be fun at the end of the day, and interviews about games should reflect that energy. They should feel like passionate gamers discussing something they love, and not corporate board meeting where everyone is afraid to say the wrong thing. The interview style is overly cautious, overly corporate, and lacks the genuine enthusiasm and challenge that makes gaming content engaging. I don't say to argue with Jonathan or, overly push back, but where is the real conversation? Just asking things that doesn't really matter for most of the people. Unless Tree is secretly GGG planned, which I don't really believe, but there is no reason for this level of tiptoeing around topic. Like, speak your mind, man. Challenge the ideas, like, be honest about the concerns that actually community has. I don't want to discard the whole interview as bad interview. To be fair, there was some genuinely good moments. The question about whatever monster pack nerfs would affect ritual mechanic was excellent, and it's forward thinking, considers gameplay implication and gives GGG something to think about before the next leak. That's what we are all looking for in the interviews with game directors. This is what the interview should have been, like meaningful questions that explore potential issues and design implication. Of course, you can mix in the light of those, let's say, serious question. Also, you can include fun questions so they can kind of rest in between. But it shouldn't be the main questioning line, because the whole interview turned kind of into meme, to be honest. And here's why this matters beyond just one interview. When significant portion of the community feels unrepresented, they become more toxic. When people see someone who doesn't understand the game speaking for them to developers, it's kind of triggering, and frustration boils over. That's why you get so much hate, and that's why you will get even more hate if you don't really consider those things into your future interview. Tree represent only one facet of community, while everyone else is left on the sidelines or behind. This creates artificial division, like the Tree supporters versus PoE veterans and hardcore players. This kind of division is destructive and generally unnecessary. The solution isn't like abandon Tree entirely, because obviously GGG picked him to be his channel of communication, but we need to diversify who gets the interview access. And I do not necessarily think that picking up different people, if GGG wants to have like Tree to be the person communicating with them, the diversity is not necessary to be like different people, which would be nice, of course. But if it's the case they do not want to actually the other people to have the voice directly, what Tree should do is just to have one part of questions comes from some content creators, build makers, people who have deeply understanding the game, other from more casual player base, so he have variety of insights from different part of community, so everybody at the end of the day feels represented one way or another. And I think that's possible. Also, Tree should consult those questions if they even make sense, because you obviously lack of fundamental game knowledge. You should have someone to actually go over it to understand the question, if there's even point to ask the question, because like with the stuff before, you ask question about the stuff that is already fixed in the game, which makes totally no sense. So my solution will be rotate interviewers based on expertise, like different content creators that excel in their own things, and include those parts of community that doesn't really feel represented in your interview, because as we said, you're right now the only person who have access to have regular interviews and chats with the game directors. Community submitted questions should be not randomly chosen on the vibes or anything, or upvotes. Yes, you can pick the most upvoted things, but you should like think about them if there's any sense to actually ask them if they really represent something, or they're just, if they're just people making jokes. This creates cycle of ignorance. Like, you do not know the depth of the question, or if it's even like viable question, and it probably comes from the people who doesn't know either. So you need someone or something to go through it if they actually make sense to ask those questions. I mean, the best way would be to create multi-creator panels instead of one-on-one interviews, but I don't think GGG would actually agree to that, to do it like more often. Definitely you should do more homework and when you prepare for those interviews, and not just go with the vibes of the question, like profanity question in the console and stuff, bro. Also, GGG should create dedicated community manager who can synthesize feedback from multiple sources. One person cannot and should not represent the entire device community. Fact checking should be also something like I said before. You should fact check your questions, consult people before you actually ask those questions. If you don't want any, if you don't those questions to come out as kind of spoilers, just have, grab some people, community, grab some content creators, and they will definitely, keep the stuff from themselves. You don't even need to name from which person this question is. It should be just good question that satisfies the community. In the future interviews, you need to examine how GGG design philosophy has evolved since ExileCon, because we see some kind of, disproportion that didn't age well. When they promise one thing, they do another thing, and you can ask what actually changed in this philosophy, like the screenshot that explains the bad design, which is included in the which they include in the game right now. So you could ask interesting questions like that and see why and how things change and why did happen. And you don't need to be hostile in any way, but just constructive and informed. You need to be hostile when asking those questions, because those are legit, real concerns and real questions that could be asked. And my conclusion is this isn't about the hate. I want to be crystal clear on this. This critic isn't about the hating Tree as a person, because I think he's just a scapegoat of his own ignorance and misunderstanding of what this game and what this community is about. He don't really understand. He's not the whole reason why people hate him. He's just it's about recognizing that the current system isn't working for the large portion of the community. The Path of Exile community has stuck with this franchise through a lot of good and bad, and people are passionate about it. When we criticize, it's because we care. We point out problems because we want solutions. And GGG needs to recognize that different segments of the community needs different representative or inclusion, so to speak. I think people misunderstand or forgot that Path of Exile 1 players aren't incapable of appreciating good changes. We celebrate them. We are so back meme and stuff like this when they happen. Path of Exile 2 newcomers aren't wrong for wanting a different experience too, but both perspectives are valid and both deserve some kind of representation. But right now we are heading towards more toxic, more division, more frustration. The solution is kind of pretty simple. Diversify communication channels, rotate interview based on expertise, and ensure whoever gets that microphone actually understand what they are talking about and what they're asking. The community deserves better, the game deserves better, and frankly, even Tree deserves a system where he's not carrying the weight of representing everyone while receiving all the community hate for not doing it perfectly. And I hope we can fix this before it gets worse. All the best for you guys. See you in the next video. What are your thoughts? Do you think GGG should rotate interview? What would you want to see in the future of developer interviews? Let me know in the comments. Maybe we can find more solution for this problem together. Bye!